We're in the end game now. With only 15 games remaining in the regular season, the Jets are fighting not only for the Central Division crown, but for the President's Trophy. Can they win both? Find out on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app right now and make every moment more because new customers can get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now, like I said, it is, getting to the final stretch of the regular season. I honestly can't even believe there's only 15 games left. It's felt like time has just sort of flown by this year. I guess time really does fly by when you're having fun. And I think if you could say anything about the season, it's been fun. Even though there have been some ups and downs and some things that are a little bit frustrating on the whole, right? I'd say that the fan base is pretty happy with the team. Obviously, there's some stuff that could be fixed in the margins, but, compared to where we were at this point last year, I think every Jets fan would agree this is a much better place. Relatively speaking, our quibbles tend to be, they're not small, right? But I would say in the grand scheme of things, like having watched this team basically push the rock up the hill like Sisyphus for many seasons, this is about as good as it gets, right? We've only had one truly outstanding season that really exceeds this one. And, that team very nearly got to a Stanley Cup final. And maybe this is the year. The Jets have two of the best goalies in the league, one of the best tandems in Hellebuyck and Bressois, both of them having career seasons, and a team that is defensively stingy and an offense that hopefully is starting to round into form because the next stretch of games for the Jets, this final next few weeks, it's going to be one of the hardest stretches the Jets have faced all year. And of course, with the Jets having a game or two in hand on some of the other Central Division members, they have to get every extra point that they can if they want to try and win the crown. But of course, the Jets had some business to take care of before then, facing the Columbus Blue Jackets. And look, everyone knows that the Jackets are not exactly great. Winnipeg had done a pretty big number on the Anaheim Ducks, so you probably figured, well, here come the Jackets. Are they really going to be that hard to beat? And as it turned out, it was a closer game at first than you'd think. The Jets definitely had the scoring and box score edge, but if you look at some of the perhaps underlying numbers and you actually watched the opening, I would say 20 to 25 minutes of the game, you'd probably have two separate impressions of what exactly happened, right? Because on the score sheet, the Jets were in the lead, and they had some pretty goals from guys like Connor and later on Ehlers and all sorts of contributors. So even Logan Stanley got in on the action. But if you actually look at how they played, for a good stretch of the game, they were not the better team. Columbus was peskier, more aggressive, and I think the one thing that has often stood out about the Jets this year is that when Winnipeg faces a really fast forechecking team, it tends to cause them problem, especially when they try to make zone exits. When they're trying to get out of their own end, Winnipeg gets picked off, they make really sloppy turnovers, and it's funny because I know Ehlers is always the one who gets nailed for this, and sometimes he has pretty bad ones, but generally speaking, this is just a symptom that really plagues the entire team. Winnipeg is just very careless with the puck, and it's especially noticeable when you ice the lineup that the Jets did, where they took out Sandberg and Miller in favor of Schmidt and Stanley. Now, I like Schmidt, and I enjoy, the thought of Logan, less so the reality, but with this team needing more puck-moving ability, I'd probably not be scratching Sandberg and Miller in future games against playoff-caliber opponents, because those guys are probably going to be a necessity to keep the puck moving up and down the ice. Winnipeg definitely doesn't want to get into a habit of relying on some of their slower guys who maybe aren't as clean on their exits, especially when they're facing really tough teams like they're going to tomorrow in, say, hey, New York, right? The Rangers, really tough customer. They're going to be part of a streak of really tough games that we're going to talk about later on. But for this one, at least, after the first 20 to 25 minutes, then the tide started to turn. This game was kind of funny because there weren't really any lines that I would say did poorly. In fact, everyone was pretty much in the green on pretty much all counts. And against Columbus, you sort of get that, right? The Jackets did score a little bit later in the game and tried to claw back a couple of opportunities, but Hellebuck really shut the door on everything else. And Winnipeg's top performers, guys like Toffoli, Monahan, Ehlers, Scheifele, to an extent Connor, those guys really stepped up and delivered some big performances. Morrissey too. So a lot to, I guess, enjoy, but in terms of lessons taken from this game, wouldn't read too much into it, right? I would look more at what the Jets maybe didn't do as well as a sign to watch out for the future. But it's stuff that we already know Winnipeg struggles with. It's nice to see that at the end of the day, though, the Jets still managed to get by their own issues and start to really apply pressure and overwhelm their opponents. Now, what the Jets do in tomorrow's game is going to be really interesting because Bones had said that the lineup that he used against Columbus was not the original plan. Perfetti, Miller, Sandberg all scratched, and then he decided to change his mind, which there wasn't really much of an explanation other than he just liked how the team played against Anaheim. Now, if he's rotating guys and resting them, I'm fine with that. I would just like to make sure that that doesn't become a habit when you're about to face really strong teams, right? You do need to make sure that Miller, Sandberg, and some of your more skilled players are still not, I wouldn't say, as sharp as they possibly can be, but, in pretty good form. You don't want to leave them sitting for too long. And while rest can be really helpful, make sure that you're not, overdoing it and actually getting guys into a bit of a rusty state, especially against an opponent that's going to require all of Winnipeg's focus. We're talking about one of the top 3 teams in the NHL, and that is just kick-starting off a stretch that's going to feature a lot of playoff teams. It's going to be a really tough road, and I would say that if you're really going to want to get a sense of what this Jets team is truly like, ignore what happened against Anaheim and Columbus. Both games, very fun. We enjoyed it. I'm sure you did too. Lots of goals. Some guys who haven't scored in a while contributing on the score sheet. But in terms of really big takeaways, you're just not going to learn a lot about how the Jets are, because when it comes to bad teams, this year Winnipeg's kind of wiped the floor with them. I mean, generally speaking, there haven't been many tanking or well below playoff line teams that have given the Jets fits. It's basically been like San Jose and a couple of other squads that have been, for no particular reason, stonewalls, but the Jets even managed to solve the Sharks eventually and got by them. So now it's really just a matter of whether or not what we see against the bad teams translates against top teams, because they haven't done it over the past couple of months. But tomorrow is a new day. This is the final stretch of the season, and as we start to get some guys back, hopefully we get Velarde back sometime in the next couple of weeks, this is a chance to really find out what this team is made of. Winnipeg has talked a big game. They've worked really hard to get to this point. Now it's time to take those words and really put some real action behind them. And I think the guys all know this. They're really chomping at the bit. I think they're ready for the playoffs to start. I think they are hungry for success. We're seeing Scheifele basically take command of shifts. We're seeing Morrissey take command of shifts. Ehlers and Toffoli are starting to really find chemistry. The Lowry line continues to chip away offensive zone possession. The fourth line still continues to roll. There's a lot going on there that I think is trending in the right direction. It's just, can they replicate it against top teams? Well, we are about to find out in the biggest of ways, because holy heck, is Winnipeg's next 3 to 4 weeks of hockey an absolute gauntlet. We're going to talk about what the Jets are going to have to face and how they can accomplish quite honestly, a bit of an unthinkable feat here over the next few weeks in just a moment. Before we go too much further and get ahead of ourselves, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at Robinhood Retirement. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claimed as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Hello, friends. Welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are talking about Winnipeg's stretch from hell that's about to hit. Let's just say the next and final 15 games of this regular season are going to feature some really, really tough tests, some boogeymen for the Jets this year, some teams that they've really struggled to beat, and really the biggest test of what this team's character and ability truly is. Can the Jets rise to the occasion and prove to us that they truly are Stanley Cup contenders? They have so many pieces in place. Now it's time to see if they all come together, especially in these final few weeks of the year. Before we talk about who they're going to face and what I'm really expecting from these games, I just wanted to let you know something really important for a lot of you baseball fans. As you know, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. Baseball fans, it's especially time to take note of Locked On Sports Today because on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern, you're going to have a chance to watch and listen to the best MLB season preview coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. On March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern, be the first to get local insight from our experts all around the Locked On Network. Find it on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube and the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Now, like I said about the Jets, if we are talking about a very dicey stretch of games, let's just admit that the next 4 weeks are going to be, well, hairy. From now until April 18th, man, the Jets are facing one of the toughest slates of games in the whole league. The Jets are first going to kick it off with the Rangers, who are like second or third in the NHL right now, somewhere in that range. Let's take a quick look. It's pretty brutal, man. Like, this is one of the toughest. Yeah, they're in second. Holy cow. The Rangers, I know that they're perhaps a little uneven compared to previous years, but we'll talk about their lines in a little bit because this team just continues to find ways to produce. And this being the opening stretch of one of the toughest road stretches for the Jets in the whole season, it's going to be a rough one. The Metro, at least, has been in some ways a relatively beatable opponent, but we haven't seen the Rangers in a long time. And the last time that we did face them, Winnipeg narrowly lost thanks to some special team stuff. So it'll be interesting to see how the Jets do now that Winnipeg's power play finally doesn't suck. Unfortunately for the Jets, Igor Shesterkin finally looks like he's figured it out. So, not ideal. You'd probably prefer that he continued to struggle because, the Rangers can be a bit of a frustrating team if Shesterkin is, really on his game. Then they'll face the Devils on Thursday, which, New Jersey is an interesting team. They kind of have a Jekyll and Hyde thing going on. Some games they look really competent. Some games you're not really sure if this team knows what's going on and is really interested in making the playoffs. So, obviously everyone knows that they're fighting for a playoff spot, but sometimes they just don't really seem to be all that with it. All that said, still a very pesky opponent, not one that you can take lightly at all. And with the Jets really needing to get every single point that they can out of these games, this is not a team that you can, sleep on and rest too lightly. Same can be said for the Islanders, who are just not very good, even though they've struggled recently and have kind of gotten some big blowout losses. For the Jets, they're going to be facing a team that's really fighting for its playoff life and has really no foreseeable future that's particularly bright. So the Isles are basically going to be cashing in all their chips and pushing everything forward to try and make the postseason while they still can. They have some really nice pieces, but I think everyone knows that this team's time is probably running out. And with how Lamoriello has kind of structured their whole back end and roster, it's not looking great. So they have to make the postseason, and they're going to be fighting for every single scrap and bit that they can possibly get out of Winnipeg on this coming Saturday game. Then the Jets get a rematch, another afternoon game on Sunday against the Capitals. Now, look, the Caps might not be great, and the Jets might have embarrassed them in the last game. I don't think we're going to see the same level of embarrassment in Game 2. Not only because the Jets are going to be on the second half of a back-to-back, but also because the Caps recently have kind of been rolling offensively. Now, that's not to say that the Jets are necessarily going to struggle in the same way. I think Winnipeg really did a good job of completely shutting down Washington's transition game. I just don't know if they're going to be able to do it a second time. We'll have to see. If the Caps make adjustments and start to stretch play and really go for fast counters, the Jets may find themselves in some trouble. We'll see. Winnipeg has done pretty well against teams that are well below them in the standings. It's just a question of, can you replicate it, especially when you're going to be pretty tired after some tough games against the Rangers, Islanders, and Devils the couple of days before. Then, the Jets come back home for like a good 5-game homestand. This is going to be one of the final homestands of the regular season. They're going to start it off with maybe the best team that they're going to face in this whole stretch, and that's the Oilers. And I know that sounds funny, but Edmonton is a very scary team. McDavid and that offense are absolutely firing on all cylinders. They are a very strong opponent. Zach Hyman has 40-plus goals, if you can believe it. And that offense just seems to keep on churning out goal after goal after goal. This is a team that really is only held back by the strength of their goaltending. If they finally have at least like a league average save percentage in the postseason, look out. Their next opponent after that is going to be Vegas. And obviously, I think the Jets really want to kind of put Vegas a little bit further behind in the playoff race. Right now, the Knights are in a wild card spot, but they've got Minnesota breathing down their neck, and it's not quite as secure as they thought. They've got around like a 55 or so percent playoff odds, which is not exactly where I think Vegas envisioned itself. Tomas Hertl still hasn't made his debut. He's somewhere in the future. No one even knows when he's coming back. Same with Mark Stone. So maybe it actually makes sense for Vegas to miss the playoffs this year. They're not really in a great state, and I think with the amount of injuries that they've dealt with, perhaps discretion's the better part of the valor, because they didn't really acquire too many guys in the rental sense. So, maybe wait till Hertl's back up to full strength. After that, you've got, a little bit of a break in Ottawa. Still not a team that I would necessarily sleep on. The Sens have embarrassed the Jets before. So let's not, throw away 2 points, especially because the Jets are then going to face a number of teams that are right behind them or just ahead of them in the playoff standings. They're going to face LA and Calgary. Now, these teams obviously are in the Pacific, so that's at least a little bit nice in terms of perhaps not having to worry so much about the Central Division matchups. But then things get a little bit dicey as you get into early April. You're going to face the Wild, the Preds, the Stars, the Avs. Basically, your big four that are not only teams that are chasing you, but also teams that you are chasing. And for the Jets, these games are probably going to decide who comes out with the Central Division crown. The race is really a 3-horse race between Winnipeg, Dallas, and Colorado. And if I'm being honest, I think the Jets are going to finish a close second. I think it's going to be a little hard for them to just get past Dallas unless the Stars start to slip because Ottinger is struggling. Wedgwood's a really good backup, so I don't know if that's necessarily going to be a problem. But overall, I think this is going to be a super close race. The Avs have been ripping teams apart recently, and, I wouldn't be shocked if the Jets lose both of the games against Dallas and Colorado. These are road games. They're against teams that Winnipeg has struggled with in the past, especially Dallas. Colorado, the Jets, I think, beat earlier this year. Not sure I want to lean too much and read into that and those results just because that was much earlier in the season. And I think with where Winnipeg is now and where the Avs are now, Colorado added some real offensive and back-end heft. So we're going to have to just sort of play it by ear and see how the Jets do. But can't believe it. We're finally in the final stretch. And then, closing the year out, you've got Seattle and Vancouver. Seattle, at that point, is not going to have anything to play for. Vancouver probably going to be fighting for a President's Trophy in the same way that the Jets might be. So I expect the last game of the regular season to be pretty pitched, pretty difficult. But, Winnipeg, man, I have a really hard time thinking that they're going to go much higher than 500 here. I think if they kind of split most of these games, it's not the worst outcome. The Jets are still on pace to have 50 wins. That's a pretty friggin' fantastic season, if you ask me. Maybe not where they thought they would be after such a hot start, but, the Jets right now are in first in the Central. They've got some games in hand. They just kind of tore through 2 bad opponents and, kind of picked up their goal differential. I'm sure they're feeling a little bit of confidence, a little bit of swagger, and they've still got a shot at maybe even nailing some President's Trophy accolades. So, keep an eye on this team. Winnipeg has come a long way. They've proven that they are very battle-tested, and they've still got a lot of fight left in them. let's just see if they can come out on the winning side against those playoff teams. I really want to feel good about this playoff run because we just know there's not a lot of them left. But obviously, they've got a really big test tomorrow against the New York Rangers. We'll talk about who we're going to be seeing in this team. A lot of former Jets for some reason, including a name that you're going to be very familiar with who just joined at the trade deadline. We will talk about all of that in just a moment. Before we go any further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Of course, March Madness is when a lot of you really start to get interested in college basketball. I may not follow it myself all that much, but I know a lot of you are really into it. I just don't know enough about basketball to even think about it. But you know what? Even if I don't, FanDuel makes it super easy to get in and on the action. Even if I suck at making brackets, maybe this is your chance to win big where I fail. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on everything from point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to emerge from March Madness and win it all. All you have to do to get started is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. I wish you best of luck and buon fortuna on all of your brackets. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on these closing thoughts as we are just wrapping up with some final remarks ahead of Winnipeg's start to their hell stretch. They're going to be facing off against, the New York Rangers, and this team is pretty dang good. Let's be honest. The Rangers have one of the best defenders in the league. They've got some amazing finishing talent. They've got a goalie who's starting to really put two and two together. And recently, they've been in some pretty high-scoring games, some of which have not always favored them. But you know what? The Rangers are still a dangerous team, still a really tough opponent. And I think Winnipeg is going to have to be on its absolute best behavior to come out of this team. I mean, this is a squad that actually beat the Devils not that long ago. So, for the Jets, very tough opponent, very tough test. And this kicks off one of Winnipeg's hardest stretches of the entire season. What's funny about the Rangers is the Jets played them earlier this year, and it was a pretty close loss for Winnipeg. Now they're going to face a pretty different-looking squad, I would say, just because there's been one or two additions and some guys returning from injury. Up top, they're going to have Kreider, Zibanejad, and our old friend Roslovic, which Roslovic, I don't think he's necessarily a difference maker, but in terms of a guy who's provided some tertiary scoring ability and skill, not exactly the worst player that they could have added. Roslovic was very cheap, and I think they've really tried to find ways to get Zibanejad going because Mika's season this year has been pretty rough. I don't know if his 30s are starting to really catch up with him, but it's not exactly been a banner season for the guy who has kind of been anointed their #1 center. On their second line, though, you've got really one of the true MVP candidates for New York, and that's Panarin. Panarin, Trocheck, and Lafreniere as a trio, just absolutely monstrous, very scary. Anytime Panarin is on the ice, you are in danger of getting scored on. This dude is just dunking on everyone. He's one of the best players in the league. There have been times where legitimately I felt like he's a Hart Trophy candidate. I don't think that's this season, but this is a dangerous top six. Kreider's still good. Mika, even in his lapsed days, are still very skillful. Panarin's a monster. Trocheck has been a bit of a find for this kind of middle six rotation for the Rangers. And then, of course, they've added, Venberg down the middle. So their third line is now VC, Venberg, and Kakko. Kakko's really started to turn his career around. He looks like a really solid two-way forward with a lot of potential and skill. Maybe not the counting stats that I think a lot of people were expecting from him, but he is still a really good player and somebody who I think the Rangers are hoping to include in their core for the very distant future. Now, the one thing, where the Jets may really have an advantage is in the bottom line. The line of Cooley, Goudreau, and Brodzinski is pretty weak, comparatively speaking, and that's where I think the Jets might be able to take advantage of some softer matchups. Now, I'm not going to say that this is the most important one because fourth lines only play a handful of minutes a night, but if the Jets can come away winning against this matchup or, whatever combo that's similar that the Rangers run out there, maybe the Jets can find a little bit of an advantage. It's not going to be a significant one, but if the bottom line can get a point or two out of this evening somehow, that would be fantastic. We've seen Barron get close. Maybe he wants to score against his old club. Do the Jets a favor? We'll find out. On defense, you've got Ruido and Fox. Obviously, Fox, what is there to even say about this dude? He's just one of the best out there. There's really nothing else to say. Morrissey versus Fox is going to be a super fun battle. You've got two of the best defenders in the league going head-to-head, and I think it'll be a really close matchup. You've also got Miller and Schneider on your second pairing, and then Gustafson and Jones on your third. I think the Jets, if they roll their stronger starting lineup in terms of the blue line, having Miller and Sandberg back in, I think Winnipeg's blue line wins out, but it's going to be a tight battle. Pionk has really struggled recently, so yeah, you're going to want to be careful with Dillon and Pionk and maybe actually shelter them a bit, given how things have gone the past 2 weeks or months. Let's just be honest, it's been longer than that. Brendan Dillon's still doing fine enough. He's been good. I'm more concerned about Pionk's recent issues, but it is what it is. You can only control so much, and the coaching staff really trusts him, so it is what it is. As far as the Jets are concerned, I think we might see Connor, Scheifele, and Iafallo stay together. They've been good against bad teams, but I really am not sure how they're going to do against some stronger opponents. But I'll reserve judgment until we see it. I have a suspicion it's not going to go nearly as well as I'd like. I'd honestly love to be proven wrong, because having anyone who can make Scheifele and Connor work would be an absolute miracle. Other than Ehlers, because Ehlers, we know is not really getting a lot of first line minutes. So somebody else, if they're going to have to find somebody to step up, please let it be Iafallo. Just let it be somebody. That's all I'm asking. So far, so good, but again, against bad teams. Ehlers, Monahan, and Toffoli are really starting to find some chemistry. They've been kind of cooking. So even if the first line struggles, you've got a second line that seems to be doing the business. I do think Perfetti probably draws back in for Gustafson. We'll have to see. I know Perfetti does take it hard every time he gets scratched, and I think Bones is probably not going to scratch him for 2 straight games. We'll find out. Or I guess 3 straight games in this case. But we'll see. Skates, we'll keep an eye out tomorrow and see what happens. I'd really like for him not to keep sitting. I know people will say, well, what has he done specifically? That's good. And he's just been able to keep up, right? He's made some good passes. He's gotten close to scoring. Gustafson has had a much rougher stretch. I love Dave, but since coming back from injury, it's been a really uphill battle for him. So, sliding Nemestikov back down at center, having Perfetti and Barron out wide, I think that's probably your best fourth line combo. So cross your fingers, hope those guys draw back in. Same for Miller and Sandberg. Stanley and Schmidt have held down the fort beautifully. Now it's time to add a little bit more potency on your back end and get a little bit more skating ability, because you're about to face teams with a lot more skill and a lot more speed and forechecking. So very tight games. I'm kind of excited, but also a little nervous. We'll see how things go. Let me know your score predictions for tomorrow's game and how you think maybe the rest of the season is going to go. Perhaps you even toss out some season record predictions in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. But for tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. We'll be back here tomorrow with coverage of Winnipeg versus New York. Cross your fingers. It is a victorious report, because Lord knows the Jets need a quality win against a quality opponent. But like I said, that's all the time that we've got for tonight. I thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow, so be sure to like, follow, and subscribe. Have a great night, and as always, go Jets go.